Yes, we do.
Oh,
All right, fantastic. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone. Looks like we also have a good turnout today, so we're really excited for this. This is the first in what's going to be a series of lectures that we're going to be doing with the scientific, with the research committee. And I want to also announce one of the initiatives we're going to be doing is a journal club. Surgical Journal Club will be we'll hand out or mention what the paper is going to be. We'll prep it, come over here. We'll do a critical analysis of the paper, hopefully teach you how to analyze these papers, and in doing so, improve your research capabilities. So this is something we'll be doing moving forward. But of course, this lecture comes very highly, with high praise. So I'd like to thank Dr. Abdel Sattar for agreeing to, give us this lecture again. And again, this is very, very high yield. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Abdel Sattar.
thank you, Asul, for this introduction. So I will talk today about scientific writing 101. This will work for surgeons, non-surgeons, medical students, anybody who's really interested in publishing. It's a very easy recipe that I learned throughout, my years. Not to say that this is the only recipe, there's multiple recipes, but I think this makes it easy. When I first started out, I found it the hardest is actually how to get started in writing a paper. So when you have a framework, like I'm going to show here, it will make things, much simpler, easier to follow, and, almost guarantee that your papers will go in smoothly, hopefully with favorable revisions, and get eventually published in high impact journals. Just a quick introduction about me. So my name is Zaid Abdel Sattar. I am a thoracic surgeon at Loyola University, Chicago. I've been there since 2020. Prior to this, I was at the Mayo Clinic for 10 years. I was the first assistant professor of surgery at Mayo Clinic who got the title as a trainee. And I finished general surgery and thoracic surgery there. I was in a 4+3 track. Obviously, as everybody, who's from Jordan was applying for surgery, I started off as a prelim first and then became a categorical. During my time, I took 2 years off. I wanted, research is one of my passions, so I wanted this to be part of my career. So I went to the University of Michigan and did a Master's of Science in Health and Healthcare Research and completed the research fellowship. أنا سويت امتياز بالمستشفى الأردن وتخرجت من الجامعة الأردنية ب 2009. I'm board certified in general surgery and cardiac surgery. I have over 80 published papers and book chapters, 40 national presentations. I serve as a reviewer for these journals here. I serve also on the social media committee for the analysis of surgical oncology. And so far, I've mentored over 10 medical students. All of them have matched into surgery and thoracic surgery. And I'm happy to help anybody who is interested and foreign graduates. I also have an announcement. Since I joined Loyola, I was able to obtain funding for a research program. So we have a research fellow that joins us every year. We actually just hired our third person who is a graduate from Jordan, from the University of Jordan. And I think I saw his name on the call here. His name is Ayham Aoudeh. So we're excited to have Ayham with us. He's going to be starting with us in August. So when he's first starting the paper, the first section is the introduction section. It's usually 3 paragraphs, and I'll show you everything how I like it to be done. The 3 paragraphs, they should tell a story, they should be cohesive, and they should give the reader and the reviewer an idea of what you're going to do and identify the gap that is currently in the literature. So what is your research going to add and what you're going to help the reader understand and grasp from this topic. So the first paragraph is usually what is known about the topic. The next one is what is unknown about the topic. And then the last paragraph is, in this context, this is what you conducted. So I'll show you this in exact details here. So this is a paper, for example, that we published in the journal Cancer in 2017. So it's called the Impact of Health Insurance on Cancer Care in Disadvantaged Communities. So you see the first paragraph goes about what is known. So it goes over the facts, you cite the literature in here. So we say cancer is the second leading cause of death, for example. This is how many people it kills. There's a lot of advancements that have occurred, but there are still some factors that prevent Americans from receiving optimal cancer care. And then you go over these things in detail. And the last sentence is what is called the hook sentence. You should always structure it this way. So if you do 4 or 5 sentences that first describe what is currently known about the topic. So our topic is about health insurance, cancer, and disadvantaged communities. So these are the 3 keywords. So you have to put these 3 keywords in your first paragraph. So we talked about cancer, that's the 1 keyword. We talked about health insurance, which is the Affordable Care Act, especially at that time, that was a hot topic. And then disadvantaged communities. So we have to figure out who is disadvantaged. And at that time, Medicaid served underserved people or disadvantaged communities. And these are the proportion of patients who are going to be most affected by the policy changes at that time. And then the hook sentence, this is what catches the reviewer's opinion, is that there's millions of individuals from disadvantaged communities and have poor social determinants of health are those among those gaining health insurance. So these patients are now going to gain health insurance. So we're going to see how things happen to them. Now, the next sentence, almost always, the next paragraph, almost always starts with however. So if you open a Word document and start building a template, so you have the first paragraph, you would say what is known, you go over it, and then last sentence is a hook. Next, you start a paragraph with the word however, and you go over it here. And here, this is what the key deficiency in the literature is and what our paper is going to help fill. So we go over, however, it's unknown whether health insurance can mitigate the effects of the social determinants of health in patients from disadvantaged communities, and the complex interplay between these factors is not well understood. So now we start talking about what the deficiencies are in the literature. So we went over it here in detail. We describe things. Even though it's unknown, but you notice there's a lot of references here. And that's very important because you can't claim that something is unknown without having references to support that you truly did your work, you looked through the literature, and truly there isn't anything in there. So you have to fill it with references. And as you see, we're already at reference 17, and it's an introduction. And usually most papers, you have about 30 references total to have in the paper. So about half of them come in the introduction section. So this is how I write the first 2 paragraphs. They always follow the exact same interplay, and I'll show you another example here soon. The last paragraph, so we said it's 3 paragraphs for the intro, always starts the way I like it. I always started with these 3 words, in this context. And then in this context, we put here what we did and what we aim to answer. So if you have a hypothesis, you put the hypothesis in here and how you are going to answer it and what the importance of it is going to be for the readers and the scientific community in general. This is another paper. This guy is a medical student. I mentored him on this paper. He was dead set on surgery, and then he ended up deciding he wanted to do medicine. He actually matched in California for medicine this year. So you see here, we have a first paragraph, what is known. Second paragraph, what is unknown, with however. We have a hook here that we studied whether you should give chemotherapy and not chemotherapy, and then take out the cancer for advanced resection. So you have a sleeve resection. And the last paragraph is in this context. I hope this makes sense so far and how the flow of the paper goes. But it's always the same thing. 3 paragraphs, what's known, what's unknown, and then in this context.
I think it does, Zaid. I love how you really simplified it there. And even though I've never had someone explain to me that way, it also flows because you read a lot of papers and you see how it's done. And this is a great way to kind of summarize it. One additional thing is I always say this is I tend to write my introduction as the very last thing. I like to do it kind of towards the end when I can really sum up everything really nicely. What's your thought on that approach?
Yes, I agree. I read the intro, the last one. I read the intro at the very end. But I want to show you here how the framework is so that when you start writing it, it ends up coming up together. The first section that I usually write is the methods and the results. Obviously, the way I do things, every paper that we've written has been an abstract that was presented. So every abstract should become a paper. I hate it when a lot of applicants send their CVs, for example, and it's just filled with abstracts and there's no paper out of it. When you're a surgeon and you're looking to hire somebody, the key thing that we're looking for is this person a finisher? You finish what you start. And the research does not have to be cancer curing research. It doesn't have to be, ما حنكتشف الذرة in this research, right? All we want to do is demonstrate that this person can see a product through from idea to fruition. So you have an idea, it's a question, it's a research question, it's an idea that comes in your mind or your inventor's mind, and you work on it together. And the end result is a paper product that this is the currency, right? There's a sentence or a saying in the academic world, publish or perish, right? So you either publish or you perish in the world of academics. So you have to be in this machine. And as you build more momentum, you will have more things happening at once, and it becomes like you become like a factory. And I learned all of this pretty much from Michigan. And at Michigan, the Department of Surgery is phenomenal. You know, they truly, it was a phenomenal experience. And all of this the knowledge that I'm bestowing upon you guys now is mainly from my mentors over there. Okay, so they follow the same thing. If you read any paper from Michigan published in the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Annals of Surgery, JAMA Surgery, they follow pretty much the same flow. Okay, this is a tried and tested method. Obviously, there's others. There's multiple schools of thought. Sometimes you find a clinical trial in the New England Journal of Medicine. The intro is one paragraph, very small paragraph. That's it, and it gets in. But I like it this way because when you read it, it truly is an enjoyable read and makes it easy for the reviewer. But I agree with you. It's at the end of the introduction. I write this at the end. You jot down your ideas, but then you finally framework it and massage it to the way that you want it at the very end. The next section is the methods section. Usually it's easy if you divide the methods section into headers. So have different headers in the methods. And the first one would be your data source. The method is very easy because you already have analyzed the data, and especially easy if you're the one who did the math. So if you're the person who did the mathematics, which every fellow with me who's going to be working with me, they all learn statistics and they all learn how to do it themselves. So this just flows naturally because you just translate the code into words. Very simple. And once you start doing lots of papers that are the same, so same data sources, similar analysis, just different research questions, different disease sets, different patient populations, you can just tweak things, but you will have a template of your own. So the first thing is data source. So what data did you use? Did you use Medicare? Did you use National Cancer Database? Did you use University of Jordan data? You know, did you use Abdali Hospital data? Whatever it is, you have to specify your data source. And it'd be very useful to cite the data source. So for example, NCDB and Medicare and all these national sets, they require you to cite in a specific way how you obtain the data and what year you're using. Because the aim, and we'll discuss this after, the aim is for anybody who reads your paper, if they have the same data source, they should be able to replicate it and have the same results. If they can't replicate it, that means that your study is not well described. And that's one thing that the journals also look for. So when you're submitting for a journal, you have to make sure that things are going to be replicable. So that's the data source. The next thing is the patient population. So every data source with an NCDB, it's a huge data set, right? It has all cancer, 70% of cancers in the US, all of them are in the NCDB. But you selected a certain patient population. So you have to describe who did you study. So for example, for the paper that I've shown, for example, we had patients that underwent surgery for lung cancer. And then you can specify further, like these were stage 1 or stage 2 or stage 3. So you have to define this specifically. Also in this section, you have to put your inclusion and exclusion criteria. Some journals require something called a consort type diagram, which is like a flow chart that starts with, let's say it starts with 1 million patients, and then you excluded some. So you put an arrow, and let's say 500,000 were excluded because they were stage 4, and you come down and you divide them and so on. The next thing is your outcomes. So you have to specify what your outcomes are. And the outcomes are very important because that's what the research is. And I'm a health services researcher, what is previously called as outcomes research. So that's what we typically study. And your outcome ideally should be something that is measurable and something that is easily defined. For example, we have 30-day complications, survival. These are standard terms. 30-day mortality, hospital mortality, 90-day mortality, hospital length of stay. These are things that is an outcome for every patient. That is the end result of what you're going to expose them to. In this outcome section, you also describe your dependent and independent variables. So if you have, so example for independent variables are like, you have age, sex, race, demographics, comorbidities, all these things fall in there. And your exposure variable. So your exposure variable is the thing that you're testing specifically here. So for example, in the previous study that I showed, we tested whether neoadjuvant chemoradiation or chemotherapy alone. So that's the exposure, whether chemo plus radiation or radiation alone. Our outcome was survival. So you have to describe it for the reader and the reviewer so that they can understand things and they can, it should be simple. The next section is the math or the statistical analysis. Most journals request that this is in a separate header or a subheader under methods. So it should be clearly specified. And then you go over it. What statistical testing you use? Multivariable logistic regression? Was it Cox proportional hazards? Was it instrumental variables? Was it simple univariate analysis? All of it has to be described, and there should be a good rationale of why you chose these tests. Some papers, if you use complex math, they will send your paper for a, for some journals, I mean, they will send your paper for a statistical reviewer. That's an expert that will look through the statistics only. That's their job, just to make sure that this group of authors conduct research in a statistical fashion that is correct and appropriate. It's very important to understand that some statistics are correct. I mean, most statistics are correct, but are they appropriate for the data set that you're using? And are they appropriate to answer the question that you have? Like I said, I'm a reviewer, and a lot of the times you get papers that the math is not congruent with what they're trying to say, and they focus on a p-value and they build a story around it, but that's inappropriate, right? Even though the math is correct, the math is just numbers. 1 + 1 is always 2, right? But is it appropriate in that scenario? Is it appropriate to answer that question? And is it appropriate for that data set? All these things are important, and you gain this experience with time and reading papers. Before you write any paper, especially if you're doing everything on your own, read at least 20 papers that use similar statistics or databases and rewrite their methods section in your own words after you truly understand them. I think this is a key element here. You have to make sure that you understood the other papers, they're similar to what you've done, and you mimic them. Don't plagiarize them, you mimic them in a way to describe what you did. Does that do you have any questions or additions on this, Rasul?
I think that's all. Sorry, throat's a little dry. I think that was all eloquently said. And I agree with you. I do the same thing. I read anywhere from 20 to even 50 plus papers, and then I pick out the ones where I like to use, especially for the methods. And I follow, the 3-word rule, where if I want to take a portion and use it in my writing, especially when it comes to methods, because there's only so many ways you can skin a cat. I do my best not to take more than 3 words in a row and use it. Because at that point, then you are plagiarizing. Sure. So yeah, I follow the 3-word rule when I do that.
The one thing also I want to caution people who are starting on writing. I've had a student who once, it was very clear, it was very obvious. They copied and pasted something from a different paper, and all they did was they used the synonym function in Word. And then when you read it, it's just this garbled mess of words that don't really flow together, and it's clear that they use synonyms. So don't do that. All right, just use your own language. It's not that hard to write. Just as you think it, jot it down. Some of my mentors and some of my partners, actually, the way they write is they just dictate things and their thoughts. They dictate them over the phone, and then they edit them afterwards. Just don't copying and pasting. Just try and not do that. I agree with Rasul. It's not good for you, your co-authors, and just your reputation in general. And it's
so sorry. Yeah, exactly. It's very obvious. To second that, also as a reviewer, a lot of times you'll get these papers, and it's very obvious that this has been a very poor copy-paste job. People think they're being slick and that they've done a good job hiding it, but it becomes very obvious very fast. It doesn't take long because everyone has a voice in their writing. And if it's very easy for us to pick up, that sentence number 1 looks like it was written by someone different than sentence number 2. There's no amount of work you can do to really cover that. So never plagiarize, copy paste. And some people are like, oh, I'll get 5 sources. I'll take a bit from here, a bit from there. I'll reword it. That's going to be my paragraph. And that's why your papers don't get accepted. It's very easy to see through.
Exactly. And it's funny, that person who sent me the document, he's like, oh, I put it on Crossref. So there's a software called Crossref where it gives you a percentage of how much it's, copied and pasted. And they're like, oh, look, we're at the 10% threshold, so we're fine. I was like, no, this is not correct. Right?
Because it just
voice.
doesn't make sense.
Exactly. So you can use your own voice, your own language, and just write it. It's not that hard. You don't want to copy things. It's easy, but there's no shortcuts. Unfortunately, everybody's looking for shortcuts. There are no shortcuts. You just have to do it. This is a recipe, like I'm going to show here. It's not a shortcut either. This is a recipe that hopefully will help you write. You're welcome to pick and choose what works for you and what doesn't. But again, this is not a shortcut either.
Yeah, and in fact, those plagiarism sites, I expect there to be some number matching up, right? Because there are parts where you're going to use the same sentences. You're going to say the same words because there's only so many different ways to say something. So in bariatric surgery, I'm always going to use the word 30-day morbidity, mortality, readmission, reoperation. There's no way around that. And that's going to be flagged. Yes. But, whenever you show up with 10%, I'm like, okay, did you just use a synonym editor or do something else to make this completely illiterate? And that's what happens. Yeah.
The next section is the results section. This is the easiest section to write. So the thing that most people get caught up on here is that they start either they start interpreting the data in this section, which you shouldn't. This section, you just report the facts. You just report the results as they are from your mathematics. You don't do any explanations. You don't do anything in the results section. You just report them. A lot of papers, they'll start citing things in here and they'll start discussing things. And this is why we found this. That belongs in the discussion, not in the results. So the results section, you just report it. It has to flow logically. You go from univariate analysis to multivariable analysis. You start patient level to hospital level if you have these things in there. You go from demographics to outcomes, and you call out the tables as they come. So sometimes, unfortunately, you see papers that there's tables, but they never call out tables 1, 2, figures 1 or 2. They never call them out in the results. These are things to keep in mind. You have to make sure that these are all in there. It's very simple. You just put it in there, pick a few things, and don't list everything that's in the table in the text again. That would be redundant. You don't want to be redundant. Most journals have word limitations, and you just make your paper boring. You want to keep your paper interesting. You want to تجلب انتباه الreviewer so that they read it and they don't get bored. Okay, that's super important. The results, is really easy. It's self-explanatory. You just go in it. I like most papers to have 2 tables and 2 figures. I try my best to keep it around this, makeup, but you can change it the way you want to, whatever fits for the story that you're telling. And you have to make sure that your paper tells a story from the introduction through the methods, through the results, and to the discussion when we come here. It has to tell a story. And story writing is, just think of it as, you're reporting something, and you have a certain character, which is your exposure, right? And you want to defend them, and you want to show how they could be wrong or they could be right, and have to have a balanced view of everything in there. So that's the results section. If you have anything to add on this, Rasul?
No, that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
I agree. Never duplicate. There's a word limit. Make the tables count. Let them work for you. Yeah.
Now the discussion paragraph. This is the meat of the paper. This is where, this is your chance to show how everything that you've done comes all together. Usually the way I write it, the first draft, I should say, or not the first draft, the first pre-revision version. The final manuscript that goes to the journal is 6 paragraphs long for the discussion. The first paragraph is a summary paragraph. And in this summary, I like to use, if you can, to use superlatives. So you can say this is in this first national study, or this in this largest national study. Some journals don't like you to have superlatives because of time, because sometimes when they want to make sure that it's timeless. So they wouldn't like to have a saying claims of first. They don't like that sometimes. But you can see if it's allowed or not. I generally like to do that because it highlights, at least on the first go around, because it primes the reviewer that, okay, this is an important paper. I need to, pay attention to it. They're saying that they're the first, that they're the biggest. That even if the journal at the end takes those superlatives out, I like to put them in. Okay, so you put these things in here. And generally speaking, most audiences, reviewers, readers, are gonna, when they're done reading the paper, they're gonna leave, even though it's like 7 pages long, 10 pages long, they're gonna leave with 3 points. So you have to find the 3 key points, or the 3 key elements in your paper that are the salient points, the most important things that you're gonna show that you want them to go home with. Okay, so in the summary, we say in this first national study on so and so, we found these 3 things. And then you'd say, 1, that neoadjuvant chemoradiation, for example, did not increase survival. And number 2, in fact, it increased short-term mortality. And 3, that really, omitting radiation did not affect survival. So these are 3 points, for example, 3 important things. This is the meat of the paper, and you put them in here. The last sentence of this first summary paragraph is, you will say that this is important because so and so. And then you go into paragraphs 2, 3, and 4. For each key point, you put each key point in a single paragraph, and you discuss them. So you'll have the first point, you discuss. So you discuss those 3 key points, and you contrast them in the literature and build a case. The most important thing when you're writing this discussion section is to be impartial. So even though this is your paper and you're writing this paper, and let's say, for example, I myself, I hate radiation in the pre-op setting for lung cancer. I don't like to use it. But I can't make it seem that I am biased, okay, when I write this. I have to write it in a way that I am impartial and I am just factual. So I'm just going to report the results from my paper and the results of the data that we have, and describe the cons and pros to the approach, completely impartial. Every now and then you can throw in a little bit of your bias, your voice, but try as much as possible to be impartial. Being not impartial, so if you, let's say, all I did was completely talk about how omitting chemoradiation was great, and that's it. If I do this, a reviewer might be the biggest proponent for the opposite, right? And then they're going to be pissed off, and then they're going to be like, you know what, this is garbage. I don't want to review this. This doesn't belong in here. They don't like that. It pisses off reviewers. You want to have an impartial view of things, highlighting the pros and cons of your approach, of the exposure, why it works, why it doesn't work, in there. And try to keep that in all of these 3 paragraphs for every point. And here you build your case with the literature. The next paragraph is the limitations paragraph. No study is perfect, even yours. You might think that this is the best study ever. It might be, but it can't be perfect. There's always room for improvement, and there's always room for limitations, no matter what the study is. And the easiest way to annoy an editor or reviewer is if you ignore the limitations of your study. Sometimes you have this great paper and they send it in and they don't even discuss any limitations. That immediately, almost always, unless the topic is super hot, that gets thrown on the triage process. So they wouldn't even send it out for reviews. The editor will just be like, there's no limitation section. We're not even gonna look through this. So there has to be limitations. And you discuss them and try to twist every limitation into a strength. For example, let's say we use the National Cancer Database. National Cancer Database is retrospective data. So obviously it has built-in weaknesses, built-in limitations of confounding, of, the data is what the data is. You can't collect more things and so on. But you can twist it into a strength. For example, in that paper that I showed, we say that despite these limitations, or despite this limitation, it's a retrospective observational study, this is the largest, and a randomized clinical trial, for example, will never happen because sleeve resections are very rare, and but it's a high risk, high reward situation. So even though they're very rare, but there's a huge risk that you undertake by operating on them. And then if you let them survive and cure them from the cancer, that's a big reward. So it's impactful, right? Even though it's a small subset of lung cancer patients, very impactful. And this is the largest, and there isn't going to be a randomized trial to answer the specific question. So you highlight it, even though it's a weakness, you highlight it as you twist it into a strength after you acknowledge the limitation. Same thing, let's say you used, for example, Medicare, and you have actual data on payments and reimbursements, and you don't get that data from anywhere else, right? So you can make that argument that even though this is registry data, this is admin data, but we still were able to use it, and we answer a very specific question that's related to, finances and cost, etc. So all these things are, are important to state in the limitations. And the last paragraph is the conclusion. You end with the implications, and then I hate it when papers say that more research is needed. It's more within what's the purpose of your paper, Just don't say the sentence. You end with the implications. Yes, there is research that's hypothesis generating rather than hypothesis answering, but just don't use this word. So this sentence actually is, I don't think it should be anywhere. You have this research. Yes, you acknowledge that there's limitations, etc. But just say what should we do with this? For example, in that paper, I can say that, at my institution, we're no longer going to offer this for this patient population, for example. Or if this is in a guideline, you should say that the guideline should probably be revisited. We're not going to say revised, revisited, for example. Is going to look into it again and see if we can change something, aided with the study. Again, you have to remember that you might be super proud of your paper, وزي ما المثل العربي بيحكي القرد بعين أمه غزال. Same thing, your paper is your baby, and you're going to think the world of it, and you just have to wait until your first set of reviewers, destroy it for you. And not just that, even before it goes for the reviewers, your mentor. So your mentor, when you send them your product, comes back all red, for example, and track changes in Word. That's a good sign. All right, that means that your mentor actually cares about you. The worst if it comes back with nothing. Same thing with the reviewers. If there's a lot of reviews and most of it is constructive, that's great. That means that you truly have a chance at getting in. Okay. And the key thing that, when you're writing all of this, you make the manuscript from start to finish, you have to tell a cohesive story. So من البداية للنهاية, it's the story. It's maybe you go over the history of something, how things changed, why is it changing? This is what we adopted. This is what we tested, and this is how we're gonna take it into the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think you did a really good job of highlighting all of that. That's essentially just good essay writing, right? You've got your intro, your meat, your wrap up at the end. You also made a very good point, which is your mentor, right? If your mentor is telling you at the very end, like, oh, you need to do all of these things, and he's writing you hard, that's actually the sign of a good mentor. It's someone who actually took the time, read your paper, give you back his thoughtful considerations. I've had mentors who've done that, and they've been fantastic. We've gotten good papers, and we've had some who've just been like, redo the discussion portion. I didn't like it, and that's not really constructive. You make a good point where you have to tell a cohesive story. It has to flow, right? You want the reader to enjoy reading this and have it go without continuously being stuck on various points. And the very last part is in the meat of the discussion, you say what your data is, and then you show the other sides of what the research shows, right? So like, let's say we found in our paper, sleeve after quitting smoking for a month had a higher leak rate for some reason. We would say, like, this is what we found. All the other papers say otherwise. And this paper said this paper said that. And our explanation for this, our interpretation of this is X, Y, Z. And that's where the discussion really comes together. It's not about you showing up and being like, I have, discovered something brand new. My results are all significant. It's about you bringing the data for the people because they want to sit down, they want to read your paper and have all the information they want. They don't want to be looking at being like, oh, his results are this. Well, let me go Google what other papers are showing. So it's your job to bring everything to the table for them.
Exactly. And the one thing that you have to also keep in mind is it's called a discussion for a reason. Discussion and حوار, صح? So you have to make sure that there's 2 points of view and you're giving both camps or both sides a voice in your discussion. That's the whole thing about being impartial. That you have to make sure that you incorporate that in there to make it interesting. Obviously, your first version might end up changing quite a bit after you send it in for reviews. So now that brings us to the next thing is where to submit your paper. I have a saying we have it in my office, and it says, if you're not getting rejected, it means you're underestimating your work. So you got to aim high for, to a certain extent, but at the same time, you don't want to be, bombarding New England Journal of Medicine, for example, with papers that are not going to get in. So this figure shows basically a general schematic of where things should go. So if you have a topic that has broad appeal and very compelling data, like let's say some people harped on this paper, but coffee, right? Coffee is something that most people drink, so it has broad appeal. And let's say they found that coffee increases anxiety, and the data is very compelling, and it was a randomized trial somehow. So that paper, it's hard to imagine that paper is going to go to the Journal of Botanical Science, right? That's not going to go there. That probably it will go there, but it belongs in somewhere bigger. So this is where the broad appeal narrative and the compelling data go. So these are just examples. Again, these are not to limit things. It's just an example. So you have New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Health Affairs are for broad appeal narratives with compelling data. If you have very compelling data, but your audience is going to be specialty focused. So my paper, for example, that paper that I just showed, that's a very niche, patient population, which is lung cancers that need a sleeve resection, and then whether we're going to do chemo radiation or not chemo radiation. The data, I would say, is the best we're going to get outside of a clinical trial, which will never happen. So it's rather, competitive and compelling, and it's a focused specialty, it's a focused narrative. So that would go into this light orange quadrant, which is you send it to the Annals of Surgical Oncology, Annals of Surgery, Annals of Thoracic Surgery, whatever your main journal is for your society or for your specialty, that goes in there. If you have something that is, the data is limited and it's very focused, then you have options of how you're going to spin it. So you can send it to lower tier journals, or you can, if there's not much data at all, actually, you can even just send it as a perspective or as a viewpoint or something like that. And if it's something that has a very high broad appeal, it tells a really nice story, but the data is limited, then these things belong either in the public press or an op-ed in a newspaper, or even some journals, that you can publish specifically to that. So it's just a general framework of where you want to put it. But again, if let's say, you say, oh, I have 100% acceptance rate, all my papers get accepted in, journal X. Well, maybe you should be trying for something a bit higher. If this journal X is accepting everything that you've sent and you never sent elsewhere, maybe you're undervaluing your work. You should probably go somewhere higher. So that's a saying that I always go by. So for us in surgeons, the biggest journals for surgery are Annals of Surgery, JAMA Surgery. Next comes your specific society. So for us, it's JTCVS, Annals of Thoracic Surgery, Annals of Surgical Oncology, JACS, Surgery. And then the next tier is like American Journal of Surgery and Journal of Surgical Research, or Journal of Surgical Education, and you have to, send it to where you think it probably was going to get in. And you have an idea, generally speaking, of what the impact factor for these journals are. Again, this is not, it's just a measure of one way of seeing things. It's not the be all end all. There's so many different ways of measuring the impact of journals, but that's one numerical thing that historically has been used that you can just follow. But this is just a general framework of where to send it. Obviously, when you send it, and this is the most annoying part, is each single one of these journals has their own formatting requirements, and that can be very frustrating. So the way that I do things, every manuscript, I don't know if I can show it here. I don't have it, I think, but margins on either side are standard margins, line numbering, continuous line numbering, Arial font, size 11, double spaced. Every paper should look like that. And if it doesn't look like that, I get annoyed, because most reviewers, and this format, for the most part, is going to satisfy about 90% of journals. Some have specific things, and and I hate Times New Roman. I don't think this is a font that should ever be used, but so I use what's it called? I use Arial. But if the journal requests Times New Roman, then you just do Times New Roman. And the reason why they want things to be like this is because of familiarity. So if you're a reviewer, when you get these papers, obviously everything changes once it's in print. When you're a reviewer and you look at it, they want to be able to look at something familiar. So they look at this paper and they see it flows the same way that they're always used to it. It makes the reviewing process for them easy, and the editor and the associate editors and even the journal team, they can look through things and know exactly where everything should be. But for you, when you're writing things, make sure that you start this process, like I said, with the standard, which is the Area 11 double spaced, and then you can change it the way you want to, whether it's references, sometimes it has to be 3 authors et al, or 6 authors, or 4 authors, or just 1 author. So you have to pick all these, and if you use a citation manager, it makes things easier. But every journal that you're going to submit to, you have to check what their formatting requirements are, what their word limits are, what their sections, what their headers are, and just make your paper look exactly like that. And then you send it, and you wait and see what happens. The final result, what's in print, may not even look like what you sent. It may look completely different, and that's okay. It's just part of the process. Okay, and sometimes you send it in for first round of revisions, it gets favorable revisions, and then it goes back. And when you send it in, it would be great if you get the same reviewers, but sometimes you get a set of new reviewers, and that could be very annoying because the new reviewers might have different ideas and things that you want you to change. And so a lot of it also depends on your luck with that reviewer that specific day, unfortunately. But good.
And always
good
beware of reviewer number 2.
Yeah, reviewer number 2 is the worst, always.
Yeah. And also to add to that, I don't recommend everyone does this from the get-go. But sometimes you'll have a reviewer who will say, I'd like you to talk about XYZ, and sometimes you just have to ignore it. Sometimes it's like, well, this is not even the focus of my paper. I don't even know where you're coming from. But yeah, so always, bear down and be patient with these reviewers.
And the final product before you submit should be a product that you are proud of. So when you are hitting the submit button on the journal, you have to be proud of it. Like you said, okay, I'm putting my best product forward. I'm gonna showcase my work and have these reviewers look at it and then see what the result is going to be for the revisions, and hopefully it gets in. And hopefully, if you follow this recipe, if you find things that are helpful in it, you can pick and choose, change things the way you want to. But this is generally my style, and I've been doing it for the past 10 years now, and it has served me really well, the way it's outlined, and it's worked great. I recommend reading this paper. It's written by Welsh. It's called Preparing Manuscripts for Submission to Medical Journals, the paper trail. This is the citation for it. It's an old paper, but this is a crucial paper for anybody who wants to write papers for journals. It goes through almost everything that we just went through. I did change some things in it a little bit just to convert to my style, but this is a high yield paper for anybody who wants to write and be involved in academics. Thank you. This is my Twitter handle. If anybody would like to follow me, I do tweet about medicine and surgery and things like that. I'll be
Very
hoping
nice.
open it up to questions, and if anybody has any comments, just feel free.
Yeah, what we'd like to ask, if anyone has any questions, please do type them in the chat, and we'll get to them. So we actually already have a few questions that trickle through. The first one, very general question, but how do you know which statistical analysis is appropriate for your study?
Great question. So I think there is I can show it to you here. Let me pull up this website. So obviously you need a background in research to be able to understand this, but there's a table that, you know, is very helpful. It's from either UCLA or University of Wisconsin. I can't remember. Let's see if it pulls up. And we can do a talk about, I do a course for my fellows on statistics. So I use Stata. Stata is my favorite software for these things. And I teach them all of these things, but there's a very nice table.
Is it the 2x2 grid or the 3x2 grid?
Let's see, it was a grid that had, you know, I think it was UCLA. Let's see if it was the one. No.
I actually, I agree. I'm on the same page with you. I even mentioned that. I was like, I think a talk possibly on statistical analysis would be very beneficial.
Yeah, it would be, you know, a gentle introduction. That would be good. I think it's this one. Let's see. There we go. Yeah, so looks like they, do you see my screen or no?
Oh, we do not.
All right, let me put my screen on here again. So this is a separate talk in of itself, but let me see, where is my...
One option would be screen print and throw it onto your PowerPoint and then share your PowerPoint if nothing else works.
Yeah, so this is from UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. Their website, I can't find the exact website, but this is exactly what the table looks like. And it has the number of dependent variables, the number of independent variables. So dependent is basically your outcome. Independent are your you know, your exposure and everything that's you want to focus on. And then this is what the specific, you know, nature of the variable is. So let's say your outcome is a you know, death, right? So it's a 0, 1 variable. So that would be a categorical, for example, and then you have one independent variable with 2 levels. So let's say you have sex, right? So you have sex, which is male, female, and death, yes, no. So it tells you that your best test would be a chi-square, for example. A Fisher exact test, you would use that if one cell in your 2x2 contingency table has any less than 5 observations. So you wouldn't use this. This would be, for example, the test here. If your variable, let's say, is that you have is like a normal distribution. Let's say you have age, so age should be normally distributed, and you are looking at death, so you put it on here, and then you use a sample a t-test, a student t-test. So these are the exact things. And then in the original website, they had these buttons, so you can see how to do it in SAS, in Stata, in SPSS, and in R. R is free, so R is a great resource. I don't like R, generally speaking, because I think it doesn't flow as logically as Stata and things like that. So I prefer Stata, and Stata is crowdsourced. There's a fee to buy the software in the beginning, but then after that, there's a lot of user-written commands and stuff that make things super easy to use, and it flows very logically. And I can show you guys more things about statistics and all this stuff later if you want. But this general figure, I can't find the exact website, but this is very helpful. There's multiple resources like this. And if somebody has any background in research, or they took they paid attention in biostatistics class, they can, get most of this, I hope. It's not that hard. The one thing that, you have to be cautious about with statistics is that, I don't know if you've ever heard this, this saying, but there's 3 types of statistics, or it's lies, and damn lies, right? So it's, you can tweak things, you can make it show what you want it to do, so you have to be careful. You have to be careful with how you conduct things and make sure it's appropriate. And we've seen this happen lately with COVID, and all the papers that came out about COVID, and all the stats were massaged and stuff, and it wasn't accurate. So and unfortunately, a lot of things went into big journals, right?
Yeah.
Because the math, when you look at it, yeah, it's correct, but was it appropriate? It probably wasn't. So these are the things that you have to, make sure you pay attention to when you're doing this stuff. Ideally, it would be great if you have a master level statistician that does this stuff for you, or a PhD statistician in your department. If you don't, if you have the know-how. For example, I have a master's of science in this, so I do it. So I'm a master level statistician, so I can do all these things. But a lot of people can't, or don't have the resources. So you can outsource it to somebody else, send it somewhere else, see if somebody can help you analyze it, and obviously in return you can add them on the paper. So you can do things like this if you're uncomfortable with things. But yeah, it's that's a great question of which statistical test to use, but that's a separate, I think, topic of its own. That goes in statistics. We can do a talk about that. Like I said, I give a course already on this, so we can cover it.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea, especially with so many people in Jordan. I don't know if many of the institutes necessarily do have access to a in-house statistician, so I think that would be very beneficial. And yeah, you could definitely fuddle the results with just a little tweaking, which actually brings us on to our next question, which you may have already answered. But it's saying, how comfortable were you, Zaid, specifically, doing statistical analysis coming from an MD background? I think you already kind of mentioned you also have a master's in science and statistics. But as you mentioned, stats can be done in different ways, and the way we handle unknowns by adding or removing variables can affect the results.
Yes, absolutely. And this is one thing that we didn't talk about specifically, is unknowns and how you handle them. There's so many ways of handling missing data, and some journals require you to put a missing data section in your paper, and how you handled it. You can impute it, you can omit them, it all depends, and there's all these rules, and there's all these specific fancy statistical things that you can do or not do if you want. Me personally, when I first started, I wasn't comfortable with statistics at all. So when I first started, when I was at Mayo, I was an intern at Mayo, and I did this paper. We had a retrospective review about 400 patients with rectal cancer, and what I thought research was chart review. So I built this database. It took forever to build this database, 400 patients. And I didn't know how to analyze it. So I used, Excel at first, and start to figure things out in there. And I read all these books, and I did all this stuff on my own because I wanted to learn it. And then I used JUMP, JMP. It's like a mini version of SAS, I think. It's not very good. It's point and click. It's not the greatest way of doing math and statistics. And then I was like, I really want to learn this. So that's why I went to Michigan. And I went to Michigan, it was a 2-year program of purely just learning statistics. And the master's I did was pretty much a master's in stata. So everything we did was purely stata and stata work. And once you learn it, once you master it, it's like you learned a new language. So I can show you, for example, I was just working on this paper. And let me see, pull up this code here. So let's pull up, let's share the screen. So this is stata. So stata, you write the code. See, this is called a do file. And your do file, it's code for everything in there, and you just learn it. And I watched a ton of YouTube videos. I bought books on stata and how to use it, and you just start coding it. And stata is very, very intuitive, the way to read it. So it's so easy to use. For example, this variable here. So I'm going to generate a variable called black, and it's going to be 0, 1. And here's the race, for example. And what we have here is race 1 is going to be black equals 1. Race equals 3 is going to be white equals 1. And then otherwise it's going to be black 0, white 0, etc. So this is like just a very simple thing in here. And then you go in it, you do all these things. But when you look at it now, it looks overwhelming. But when I look at it now, it's so easy. It's just like reading a second language. And then you graph it. So let's say I want to do a Cox analysis. So I have stcox is the command for it. And then here's the variables, and it gives me survival. And then the curve, I have all these things in here. And all this stuff shows up on the thing. And I have these do files for every pretty much, this is for the sleeve pneumonectomy paper, for example. Here, this is an NCDB do file. So it goes over through everything in here, and it shows the specific details. It gives you, we can also go through this. We didn't get a chance here, but I can generate tables that are publication ready. Right, so this here, I use this and it gives me a text file first, and I use latex and I put it in latex and make a nice file. So all this stuff you can do in here. If you want to do a t-test, for example, all you have to do is you just put t-test, you can use age, and it's going to be for a sleeve, for example, and you have the variable. It gives you a p-value, it gives you all this stuff, and you have to know how to read it. But that goes beyond the scope of this paper. But to answer your question, I was not comfortable at all when I first started. I mean, just like you guys, most of you, yes, we paid some attention in biostatistics, but it was never applied. You never did it yourself. And we did it, the old-fashioned way on paper. It was not very useful, in my opinion. You learn it hands-on. Unfortunately, now, it's internet. So there's a lot of things. And even ChatGPT, like when my research fellow currently didn't know how to do something, I asked him what I wanted him to do, and he didn't know how to do it. He basically put my question into ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to write him Stata code. And Stata wrote the code for him. And then he tested it, he debugged it, he showed it to me, we tried it together, and it worked. So there's a lot of things that you can do. It's life now is amazing with what you can do online and with AI. So, but there's a lot of hard work. Again, if you're looking for a shortcut, there is no shortcut, right? You have to put the time, you have to put the effort, and you have to understand how to do it. It's just like learning a brand new language.
Yeah. And I will say this, looking at that code looks very intimidating. So to all the trainees and medical students, again, I have an in-house statistician who does use Stata, and it's fantastic. They sing his praise all the time. I personally use SPSS because I think it's a little simpler for someone like me who's not really great at these things. So I just want to say it's not that intimidating. And as Zaid said, you put the time in, you'll definitely learn it. But Zaid obviously is on a little bit of another level, especially when it comes to these statistical analyses. Also, I wanted to add, you mentioned building databases, and you built this database for 400 people. A lot of times you'll have mentors come to you and say, hey, we've got this patient population, 400, 500, 600, whatever amount of people. Here are the questions we want. Please start collecting the data. And then you'll get started. You'll go through 100, and they'll be like, hey, I just read this paper. Real interesting point. I want to find out if they ever took a PPI. So now you're having to go back and redo another 100 patients, seeing if they did a PPI. Whenever you're tasked with starting a database, my personal recommendation is read as many papers as you can. Find out what all the papers report on collectively. Find out all areas of deficiency. Make it so that every patient, instead of collecting 15, 20 data points, you're collecting 200, 300 data points on each one. Because by the time you finish your database, you want it to be a paper factory. You want to be able to produce a lot of high quality papers from it. And that's how it comes around with, smart work rather than more work. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, Zaid.
Yeah, I agree to an extent. The problem that is a very real problem is, data collection fatigue. And when I was building that database, it was by myself in the beginning, and then we recruited a few more other, a resident and a fellow, and we started building it. But it took about 45 minutes per observation, per patient. It took about 45 minutes to put that in. It was too much. And if you look at you know, the key point that you said is to read, you know, what's been published before. So do a literature review before you start, because you don't want to go back and like, oh my God, I wish I collected the PPI and I don't have it. So make sure that you have it in there, that you already know, and it would be very helpful to obviously start this with a mentor who is a thought expert and a content expert on this, so that they can help you build your database the way you want it to. And yes, the aim is to make that database a mine, right? A mine where you can mine it and generate papers, generate grants, generate things out of it. For example, the one that I did actually changed the entire guidelines for the way we treat recurrent rectal cancer. So recurrent rectal cancer in the past was not really something that we can, you know, most people would say these are inoperable, they're not resectable. But all of that, we had about 8 papers that came out of that, and we published things that were, you know, amazing results. Obviously, it was at the Mayo Clinic, so you have to take that also with a grain of salt, because the same results might not be replicable at random hospital in location Y, right? So these patients should be sent to a specific place, but these were our results at Mayo and how we did this. But I had a phenomenal mentor for who I wanted to be him, right? And if it wasn't for another mentor that I had, then I would have been probably a colorectal surgeon now. But I think that it's very important to find the correct mentor that's going to help you. You also want to, the key word, you know, that once you analyze things, and this is in contrast to all the stuff. So I don't know if somebody is on this call who's a content expert in AI and stuff, they might, you know, find something I'm going to say here a little bit off. But for most regressions and for most multivariable models, the key is to find a model that's parsimonious. And what parsimonious means is that it's the simplest possible model that explains the most variation. And usually it's only, you know, 7 or 8 variables, something like that end up going in it. So, and you can, you know, Justin Dimick, he was one of my mentors at Michigan. He's the chair of surgery at University of Michigan. You can see his papers. He wrote a lot about parsimonious models and how they perform and all of this stuff. So that's one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. A few more questions. So one of them is asking for contact information. I think moving forward, the best way that we're going to be doing this is probably through the JAS page. And we'll be reaching out with these sessions continuously. And we are actually working on setting up through our networking committee, you know, everyone's email addresses, contact information to help build a network. So if you'll just bear with us,
I agree.
if you'll just bear with us a little bit longer, we'll be able to build that database, and email will probably be the forefront for communication and contact.
Yeah, it's a little bit, you know, overwhelming. I know everybody's eager and everybody wants to connect with somebody, but when I was on vacation last week, for example, and I came back and I have 1,000 plus emails, and I would say maybe 300 of those are from students from all around the world trying to do some research or something like that. So that's one, you know, so it's easy for me as a recipient. I can go through 300 emails, you know, so a lot of it is, if you find the proper channel, that would be more ideal than just a straightforward email.
Yeah, and then hopefully it's going to be through our work in the network committee. We actually are recruiting medical students onto this committee. You can reach me on Facebook. We have 2 so far. We're going to be integrating them, and you know, you'll be responsible for the medical student, possibly even resident side of helping us with building this network database. So if you're interested, reach out to me. Let's see here. Yeah, some questions about the email. As I mentioned, we'll do that. Session will be recorded and posted. All right. How do you create a patient database? Is there a specific program you can use, or do spreadsheets work fine?
Great question. So it depends on how big your data set is. So if you're looking at, there's going to be maybe 20 patients in it, start in Excel. I like Excel as a starting point because everything goes in there easy. You can use RedCap if your institution, or I don't know, جامعة دنيا أو جامعات الأردن عندهم access to RedCap. You can build things in RedCap. RedCap is easy because it's point and click, and you can put things in there in a almost like a survey format, and then puts things through into a data set that you can then analyze. Anything that is managed, I think I would say is the easiest. The reason I like Excel the most is I can import anything from Excel into Stata. So that makes it super easy for me. And same thing with RedCap. With RedCap, you can export it into an Excel sheet, and then I can import it from Excel into Stata, so I can analyze it, and that doesn't take much. The most important thing when you're building a population database, a patient population database, is that be consistent, build a data dictionary with it, right? So you don't want to be using, ideally, you use numbers. So you have the variable name, and then everything else should be numbers. And then you have a separate data dictionary somewhere else where what each number means, because that makes it the easiest to analyze. Let's say, for example, so I'm a lung cancer surgeon, right? So let's say you have a lobectomy, bilobectomy, pneumonectomy. I'm not going to put in the word lobectomy, bilobectomy, pneumonectomy in each one of these. I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, for example. And then in my data dictionary, it's a separate file. We'll say 1 means lobectomy, 2 means bilobectomy, 3 means pneumonectomy, etc. Does that make sense? But you use what you're most comfortable with and what can be then used for further analysis. So if it's something small and what your scope is, you want to make some pie charts and graphs, and that's all you want to do, then Excel would be perfect for it. If you do some fancy math and things like that, then build it in Excel and then export it into Stata or SAS or any of these things that you can do that too. So what's what you're most comfortable with? RedCap, most students in the US, when they're building these things, they use RedCap. But I'm not sure if it's a paid software, it's not free. So I don't know if they have it all done.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I do know I used RedCap at Harvard, but it was a good application. I don't believe it's in Jordan. I could be mistaken. I see Aoni saying no. I know Aoni was in Jordan for some time.
Yeah, somebody's saying that RedCap is available online for anyone, though. It might be, but I think there's a paid version that is also managed by your data administrator at your own institution that adds a bit more functionality than what the free version would probably have. And also there might be limits on the free version in terms of number of variables and number of observations. There's one question in here.
I see that. Well, we actually did talk about it. I don't know if you could perhaps the viewer miss it, but it's if the topic is novel and there's little in the literature, how do you go about talk about it in your discussion?
So that's a great point. And that is a very difficult thing to show that truly that what you're doing is indeed novel. So it might be novel for one disease site, for example, or one certain pathology, but may not be for something else, right? Like just recently, we found out that, statins, right? Statins cause a side effect, which is, leg pain or muscle pain. And then somebody just found out that these patients who have it have HMG-CoA, reductase inhibitors or something like that, or deficiencies. And that's the reason why they get the pain. But the thought was at first, yes, this is a novel topic, but you can discuss it in the context of the other disease site or the other disease that explains, a similar phenomenon, which is muscle pain and this enzyme deficiency, for example. I just read this, for example, today. It came up in my news feed. So you can always spin it in a way that there is something out there, but yours is either more novel or this is the first time it's been discussed for the specific disease site, and so on. And if it's truly, truly novel, then great for you, that's awesome. Yeah. And you can just, put it in there and try to say that some people tried to come close to this, but they didn't do it this way, or it's hard to be general for the specific question, and how you can balance.
You could also contrast it with, what your end results are. If this is a treatment that has improved survivability, like I'll talk about nivolumab, right, with the esophageal cancer, life-changing, improved survival rates, etc. and it was novel. But what they did was when they reported its results, they reported against other treatments survival rates. So there's always something that you can tie it back to.
Yes, exactly. And for us in lung cancer, immunotherapy right now is the most novel thing, right? But immunotherapy, the same agents were used in melanoma, for example, like that's what I was saying. So there's always ways to contrast it against something, and you just have to find what that thing is. Yeah, these are all great questions. Excellent. I think
So I have an announcement, if you don't mind.
Yes, I don't go for it.
First of all, thank you so much, Zaid, for the thorough talk. It's amazing, and I'll take it off. I think it's reproducible. If anyone follow these steps, it's a great way. Can just do it the same way, and it's just gonna go through it, and you will get it somewhere where you want. I just want to encourage everyone. We are our journal, Java journal. We are still small. We're growing. We're not indexed. We got it into Crossref. We have ISSN and we have DOI. We are growing, and we had our second issue release. So if anyone on the call, they have any paper, anything they would love to submit to our journal, we would love to have their submission to our journal. And we working hard on this. We have amazing team of editorial board, and we have like medical students helping us. So I think together we'll grow, and then hopefully we'll be the first PubMed index journal in Jordan. Because unfortunately, although we have all these magnificent, we'll say efforts that we do on the medical level, but still in that aspect we are behind compared with the region. So with you guys, we can get to that point. And it takes a lot of effort to get to that. But yeah, please, if you have anything in your mind, any question you want to ask me about the submission process, we have everything clearly listed in the website. So follow there, go there, and if you have any question about the submission process, let me know. We don't have the best submission manager system. It's really good on whatever we have now, but it should be straightforward. So yes, we would love to have your publications, and if you have any questions, let me know. And thank you again.
None of them are good, Auni. All of the submission managers are terrible, in my opinion, for every journal. They're super frustrating and they're very annoying. And if you get the paper rejected from JAMA, for example, and you want to send it to Annals of Surgery, it's a complete pain to reformat it and send it. I wish there was just a very easy process that copy and move it somewhere else.
Springer, I think they have a better submission manager, because they have I think I forgot the name for that, and you can transfer from journal to journal with minimal edits. I hope it's get better, more in one format for everywhere, but it's not. But yeah, our manager, we use a Open Journal Act system, which is it's based from Stanford, which is great, but it's for free. That's why we used it. And but yeah, it's doable. It's really good. I like it, but not all the features we have it. But this is what we have, and we're going with it.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. I think it, as long as it gets the job done, it's good. Because all of them, all they do is just get the job done.
Exactly.
All right, guys. I hope this was informative for everyone. And on the JAP group or the JAS group, feel free to connect. I don't just in general. I already have this now. I don't really accept friend requests. Just generally speaking, on my profile, I just try to keep things private. But feel free to, we can communicate on Messenger if you want and all this stuff. I'm very open to that. But don't get upset if I don't accept you as a friend on my Instagram or etc. But on Twitter, feel free to follow. Twitter is, I think, the most useful platform for professional aspects.
Yeah, no, I agree with you and in that sentiment. And again, everyone stay tuned. We will be talking about the Journal Club soon. We'll be posting it on the JAS group, and we'll explain and show you guys a little bit more about how we're going to be running those events. And moving forward, we are looking at a Grand Rounds lecture, which should be either this upcoming weekend or the following weekend. Topic still, it's between ACS and endocrine. So stay tuned. And thank you again, Zaid. That was a fantastic lecture. That really was great.
Thank you, Rasul, for helping arrange this. And don't forget, we're going to start our journal club. So
Yeah.
that would also be helpful for everyone.
Thank you. All right. Have a good day, everyone.